BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, and all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BLEAV for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online. The game starts here.
And the Los Angeles Dodgers close out the first half of the regular season with a 6-game road trip, and it all started in the city of brotherly love with the Philadelphia Fightin' Phillies. I was there. They ended up getting swept that series. It was an embarrassing, 3 games, I would say, is the best way to put it. They hope to go and end the first half on a high note. They faced the lowly Detroit Tigers, and they ended up losing 2 of 3 games in the Motortown. Honestly, it's been a bad couple weeks for the Dodgers. It's a frustrating week for all their fans. It's a frustrating, for the people that are covering the team on a regular basis. And there's really just not much any way to put it. So joining us on the show today, we have someone you guys have probably seen around covering the Dodgers for the past couple years now, as at least as long as I've been on social media. And that's Michael J. Duarte. He covers the Dodgers and other Los Angeles sports for NBC Sports or NBC LA, Channel 4, I believe. I'm from the East Coast, so I don't know anything like that. But Michael, thank you for coming on. I know this is the first time you've been on the show, but where can people find you, and kind of give us a little bit of a bio of, everything that you've been doing, how long you cover the Dodgers before we get onto this, grueling road trip?
Sure, Cody. I'm sure you guys have NBC where you're at too on the East Coast. I don't know what channel it is. It's just so funny that it moves every channel wherever we go. Even go down to San Diego and it's channel 3 instead of 4. But here in the LA area, most of Southern California, channel 4, you can see me from time to time on some of the broadcasts there, usually out at a stadium, Dodger Stadium, SoFi Stadium, maybe BMO if it's a big soccer match, something like that. And then you can read my writing, articles, updates on the Dodgers, news, recaps, opinion pieces, commentary, columns, what have you, all at NBCLosAngeles.com in our sports section. And then, of course, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram, all the same handle, which is Michael J. Duarte, and mostly on Twitter, giving game updates, breaking news when it comes up, and providing updates and injury updates, and every now and then an opinion, like the Dodgers' last 2 ugly blown save losses in the bottom of the 9th inning, which has this team limping into the All-Star break, kind of like Javier Bardem's character in No Country for Old Men at the end. It's not exactly the best way to go into the break, but I also think it couldn't have come at a sooner time for the Dodgers, who just kind of seem to be struggling and stuck in the mud right now. You were kind of mentioning it. A bad road trip is to say the least, but a bad couple of weeks, 8 of their last 11 losses, I believe, overall. Everyone was looking forward to that matchup in Philadelphia, 2 of the best teams in the National League. I think had the Dodgers been able to turn the tables and sweep the Phillies instead of the Phillies sweeping the Dodgers, you could be looking at the Dodgers with the best record in the National League or in all of baseball heading into the break. But that's not how it played out, obviously. And now, instead of looking at that scenario, which looked like a possibility a week ago, we're now looking at a scenario where that gap between the Padres and the Dodgers in the NL West is shrinking. And obviously you have the Giants and the Diamondbacks kind of ready to kind of reload and get healthy in the second half and make a little run for them too. So it'll get interesting now if the Dodgers don't turn this thing around in the second half.
Yeah, a grueling couple weeks, and it's actually been a grueling couple months. Since Max Muncy went on the injured list back all the way in mid-May, since May 15th, the Dodgers team, they are 1 game over 500 with a record of 27-26. And if you keep shortening that sample size, I believe over their last 45 games of play, they actually are under 500 right now by a game. So it has not been good over the last 2 months. This Dodgers team has just been playing, barely above league average. And, it comes and goes with different parts of the team, whether it's the offense struggling, whether it's the pitching staff now, which is kind of falling apart before their eyes, or even these past 2 games where the bullpen, which has been so dependable all season, hasn't been dependable as of late, just because now we're starting to see them being a little bit overused. We've had a couple bullpen games on this road trip. We've had a couple bullpen games over this past month with all the starting pitching injuries. But, you kind of touched on it since they're getting to the break. How important is it for the Dodgers team that is, like you said, limping into the break? How important is it to them to get to the All-Star break, with whatever injuries they had intact and with the players they have right now going in there healthy, just to get a couple days off? Because I feel like this Dodgers team just has some bad voodoo right now. They are not playing good baseball in any way, shape, or form. So how important is it just to have a couple of days off just to reset their minds? That way, when they do host, I believe they're hosting the Red Sox when they come back, to just get it back and change the script and, turn the page.
Yeah, that's correct. They are opening up the second half with the Boston Red Sox already. NBC is like, you better be there for that first game, which I believe comes on a Friday. And so that's going to be a great series just because Boston, LA, the rivalry that's always been there between the two cities, between the Lakers and the Celtics and the NBA and the Dodgers and the Red Sox. Not obviously as historic as the Yankees and Dodgers, but you have that 2018 World Series where, old Mookie Betts now on our team, David Price, who was a Dodger and won a ring in 2020, despite not even playing that COVID shortened season. Those guys were on the opposing end of that. So there's a little get back, I'm sure, that the Dodgers would love to have in that series. But your question, Cody, was how important is the timing, I think, of this All-Star break with the injuries that you have? And so let's chop that up a little bit like we're a sushi chef for a second. This Dodgers team, and I know you've seen it on Twitter, everyone here listening, you guys see the same things I think. This team has, in my opinion, a wild card playoff team all on the injured list right now. Let's just name some names. Mookie Betts, former MVP, MVP frontrunner before he went down with a broken hand. Jason Hayward on the IL again. Not that we're too surprised by that. It doesn't seem to be too serious with that knee contusion. He should be back after the break, but he's a guy that provides the depth in the outfield that you need and provides some pop from the left-hand side of the batter's box. And that's Max Muncy, obviously, you mentioned. That's a big one. Those are the big key guys on the offensive side of the ball. But now let's look at the defensive side of the ball. Let's look at, more importantly, the pitching, starting pitching, which in my opinion, with Tyler Glasnow, Yoshi Yamamoto, Clayton Kershaw, you could even throw a guy like Walker Buehler, Michael Grove. You could even say Emmett Sheehan or Tony Gonsolin or Dustin May, obviously, who just had a esophagus surgery on that list. That's a really, really good starting rotation, all on the injured list. And then when you look at the bullpen, especially some key pieces, and to me, Cody, this is where the Dodgers have struggled the most. Obviously, they need starting pitching, but they have the depth to kind of absorb some of it. I've been really impressed by Landon Knack, obviously with Gavin Stone, who has been pitching great up until the last couple starts this season. You have some guys that can fill in the spots. Big Maple James Paxton has kind of been up and down like a roller coaster ride at Magic Mountain this year, but he's been the only probably most consistent starter you've had, at least showing up game by game. Doesn't seem like Glasnow's back injury is too serious, so he can come back soon. Again, Walker Buehler, I think, could have pitched through his struggles, but he wanted to go to Florida and work with his pitching mechanic coaches to kind of rework everything and see what went wrong. And so I think you could have absorbed the starting pitching, but the big blow here is the injuries to the bullpen, and that's guys like Ryan Brazier, who I know he was struggling before he went on the IL, but was solid as a rock for the Dodgers last season. Joe Kelly, another guy that is a hard-throwing flamethrower. When he has it on, when he's locating his pitches, is a lights-out guy. Brusdar Graterol, the guy who many expected to kind of take over the closer role for Kenley Jansen once he left in free agency. I know it went to Evan Phillips, but he's still a really fast-throwing pitcher. He's got that bowling ball sinker. He's on the IL as well. That's coming out of your bullpen. Now Daniel Hudson appears to be a little backed up. So to me, it is the injuries to the bullpen, to your relief pitching, that have been so key in this struggles that the Dodgers have had. If you look at the games in Philadelphia outside of the blowout in game one, they were in those games when it went to the pen, they kind of folded. Look at what happened in those 2 losses to the Tigers, both blown saves. I don't even necessarily look at what Evan Phillips did, although you can't give up a home run in that spot. But he inherited the mess from Ricky Velasco, who got demoted right after, and then obviously Johan Ramirez on Sunday blowing that save and lead. And to me, those guys we just talked about, Velasco, Ramirez, I don't think those are the guys you're going to be relying on in October. Those are not your high leverage guys. And the Dodgers are notorious for doing this. They kind of piecemeal their bullpen together. They kind of piecemeal the starting rotation together during these dog days of summer. They like to, grab guys off waiver, plug and play, and then DFA them a week later. And so this is how they've kind of been able to build success. But these guys that they've been kind of plugging and playing that are filling in roles, high leverage roles for guys that they're going to be counting on it in October, they're just not rising to the occasion. They're not giving them the quality that this Dodger team has had in the past. I think it's unfortunate Alex Vesia was warming up. Maybe you should have made the move to bring him in and see if he could have gotten the save. He's been lights out in save situations this season. So it's just a shame that happened. And the last thing I'll say, Cody, I know I'm talking everyone's head off here, is the good news, the bright spot, the silver lining for Dodger fans right now is when you were 9 games ahead in the NL West, when you have a big lead, you can afford to send guys like Walker Buehler, on the IL to figure things out. You can wait for Clayton Kershaw to come back and rehab and really slow play him from his shoulder surgery before you're going to be relying on him. You can let Yoshi Yamamoto in his first rookie season after, throwing a lot of balls and a lot of pitches in Japan, get some rest, get some break during these doldrums of summer. Same thing with Tyler Glasnow, who's just been a workhorse for this team and looks like he's going to be your game 1 starter in any postseason matchup. You can let these guys get some rest here in the middle, even if you lose ground a little bit to the Padres or to the Giants or Diamondbacks. If these guys come back healthy and strong, that's all that matters. And then the final silver lining is that I haven't seen this team. They got more problems than a math book, let's be honest. But I haven't seen this team firing on all cylinders yet. And what I mean by that is the offense is clicking. The starting pitching is clicking. The bullpen is clicking. And the defense is clicking all at the same time. I know that's what they need to work on. I know health is important in that. I know maybe making some moves at the deadline. But there will be a time, hopefully come October, when all 4 of the facets of the game are clicking all at the same time. And when that happens, this team's going to be almost impossible to beat.
Yeah, Michael, you bring up a great point that I want to touch back on, and that's just the guys that they're supplementing into the roster right now. I feel like a lot of Dodger fans need to understand that these aren't the guys that are going to be here come October unless something drastically bad happens where some guys aren't coming back, that they don't make any deadline moves. But, just looking at, the current 26-man roster, especially in that bullpen, Johan Ramirez, he's given us some quality innings. Do I expect him to be in the bullpen come October? Probably not. Today was not a good, tryout for that, promotion to be in that postseason bullpen. Brent Honeywell, he pitched well today. The Dodgers picked him up off of waivers. He was actually really good, but do I expect him to be on the roster either? No. Michael Peterson's another guy who's been kind of journeyman between, AAA and the major league club. And then even Ryan Yarbrough, who is kind of like that, switch army knife, that can actually go and start games, come into the bullpen. He didn't make the postseason roster last year either. So the Dodgers are banking on some of these pitchers coming back, and they are, working their way back to come back after the All-Star break to kick off the second half. I know Joe Kelly's one of them right there. Clayton Kershaw's had his name thrown around as potentially making a start that first week or the week after the second half kicks off as well. But I think a lot of Dodger fans need to understand that this is just kind of what they've done, year in and year out. It's just that compared to years past, their team wasn't this injured. They have, I believe, 14 or 15 guys on the IL right now. And, there's some big stars, like you mentioned. Losing Betts, losing Muncy, that's huge on the pitching or the offensive side of things. And using all the pitchers that they have, that's a huge loss for the rotation. I mean, if you look at the rotation right now, it's arguably a AAA rotation led by veteran lefty James Paxton. And that's why they haven't had a quality start in, I believe, 15 games. And in those 15 games, their ERA is almost, I believe, 10 in those starts. So it's not looking good right now. I think this Dodgers team desperately needed a break. They don't go in to the break, on a high note. They kind of coast in. They don't lose too much ground. They had a 9-game, almost 10-game lead. Now it's around 6.5 games. But like you said, they had themselves enough cushion where they can try to work themselves out of the damage, of these last, couple weeks. So I want to kind of get back to that Phillies series just because we didn't really go over it much in our last live for this show. We had a whole lot of trade deadline talk. But this Phillies series, you mentioned it. It was hyped up. Two of the best teams in the National League facing off. Citizens Bank Park was rocking. I was there covering the first 2 games, fortunately. I should say unfortunately, just because after, that Trey Turner grand slam, it got pretty loud in that stadium. But I know a lot of writers and people that cover the team, they kind of view things a little bit indifferently. They say, hey, how much can we take from this series? While some people say, I mean, we're taking a lot of, we're having a lot of questions from this series. We're getting a lot of answers from this series. But how much do you look into this series between the Phillies, who are relatively healthy compared to the Dodgers, but are they that much better than the Dodgers than what the scores show those 3 games?
Yeah, great question. And I've been going on many podcasts leading up to this series because everybody in the Philadelphia area, especially, and also here in LA, saw this as, an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. You're talking about the 2 best teams with the 2 best records in the National League. It was 2 teams that seemingly could be on a collision course in the NLCS if the Dodgers can get their shit together. I don't know if I can curse on this podcast, but it's that case. But it was the tale of 2 different teams. It was one team that was getting back an MVP and a stud in Bryce Harper, who absolutely owns the Dodgers when they play each other. And I don't think he was a World Series MVP, but he plays like a World Series MVP when he gets there. And that's Kyle Schwarber, an absolute slugger who also hit some homers in that series to really sting the Dodgers. Getting those 2 guys back with the already firepower that the Philadelphia Phillies have in that offensive lineup against the Dodgers, who, when they're healthy, when they're both full strength, to me, those are the 2 best lineups. You could maybe argue the Braves could be in that conversation, but without Ronald Acuna Jr., I think they take a massive, step back from that. But those are the 2 best offensive lineups in the National League, arguably in all of baseball. No discounting the Yankees, who have an awesome lineup as well. But that was the question, like, how important is this? And there was a lot of hype around it. But like I mentioned, it was a team that was losing guys, struggling. Obviously, Tyler Glasnow goes on the IL right before that series. So the Dodgers are deduction going into that series, while the Phillies are having additions and getting guys back and reloading at the right time, where I think the Dodgers looked at it like, let's just get through this week before the All-Star break, give everybody an extra 2 weeks now to try to get healthy, relax, recover, come back mentally, and let's really make a push in the second half when we're going to reload with some guys that are on the injured list as well, plus reload with hopefully some trade deadline moves, which I know we're going to get into here as well. But the reason why I don't put any significance, importance, clout into these types of series, whether it was the Braves in that Dodger Stadium earlier in the year when both teams looked like the best before the Phillies started to run away with the East, or that Yankees series in New York, which obviously was such an amazing series that the Dodgers took. I don't put or the Brewers series, you could even argue, right before they headed out on the road trip. I don't put too much into it because, this is not, in the case of injuries, this is not the offensive lineup the Dodgers are going to be running out there in the postseason. B, your starting pitching, injuries aside, this is not how you're going to line up game 1 starter, game 2, game 3, and then your high leverage guys in the pen. And so to really, really hammer that point home, right? If you look at the starting pitching matchups of that series between the Dodgers and Phillies, and really when I look at a series like of 2 top teams coming head to head, I immediately go to those pitching probables and say, well, who's taking the mound for these teams? Are we seeing the best against the best? Are we seeing a playoff preview in the sense that your game 1 starter is going against my game 1 starter, and we're going to leave it all out there and see what happens? Well, the Phillies, they kind of did that, right? They threw Zach Wheeler out there. That's pretty close, in my opinion, to being the Phillies' game one starter in a playoff series. You could argue Aaron Nola maybe, but probably, in my opinion, Zach Wheeler's going game one, Nola's going game two. And so the Dodgers had to see Wheeler game one of that series, and then they went and saw Nola game three of that series. So they saw game one, game two starters that the Phillies would be throwing out in the postseason. And for the Dodgers side, I believe one of them was a bullpen game. You could maybe even argue two of them potentially could have been a bullpen game, but you're throwing a rookie in Gavin Stone out there, even though he's been pitching well. That was the one game that they arguably could have won in that series, in my opinion. A close game that had the bullpen maybe been a little better, you could have stolen. But Bobby Miller has not been the Bobby Miller of his freshman year. He's going through that sophomore slump. He's struggling right now. He just got sent back to AAA. I know he was in the pitching rotation, a game two starter last year in the NLDS against the Diamondbacks. But I think if everyone's healthy for the Dodgers, he doesn't even make the postseason rotation as of right now this year. And I don't think Gavin Stone would either, though I think Gavin Stone would make the postseason roster if he continues like this, and maybe he would make a case for that roster. But if the Dodgers starting pitching is healthy, he's not pitching game 1, 2, or 3 of a 5-game series. And I don't even know if he would be the fourth starter in a 7-game series, but I do think he'd make the roster, as I mentioned. And then you had a bullpen game in the third game, which seems to be what the Dodgers are doing here, like every 3 games right now with all the injuries they have. So until I see Tyler Glasnow versus Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola versus Yamamoto, Clayton Kershaw or Walker Buehler against Ranger Suarez, that's not the pitching matchups you're going to see in the playoffs until we see a healthy Mookie Betts in the Dodgers lineup, a healthy Max Muncy in the Dodgers lineup, and whatever moves they make, and the high leverage guys in both bullpens. To me, you're not really seeing best against best, mano a mano, where you can really look at it and say, this is a measuring stick matchup.
Yeah, and I think that's a correct response, especially, obviously, the Dodgers, we want them to win this series. We want them to sweep this series. The Phillies took care of business in their home ballpark. Give credit where credit's due. They are the best team, not only in the National League, but all of Major League Baseball so far this season, for good reason. But I will agree with you. The Dodgers, they come into this series pretty much limping. They're losing guys in their rotation. They're having to overuse guys in their bullpen, and their offense, for the most part of the season, with all the injuries, they have like 4 or 5 guys with an OPS under 600 that are getting regular starts at the bottom of that order. And then the top of the order, they've been widely inconsistent with, hitting runners in scoring position, hitting with 2 outs, stuff that they all did conveniently better in 2023 with a less significant, power, offensive wise on the roster. So, I mean, these two teams, they're definitely each going to be active this deadline. They are definitely going to be adding. The Dodgers are going to have to get really creative in terms of where they add, just because they do have more holes compared to recent years. You mentioned the bullpen. It's never a bad idea to add some arms in the bullpen. The starting rotation is a big one, just because they do have question marks with Yamamoto, Walker Buehler, Bobby Miller, and I know Clayton Kershaw is getting ready to come back, but that's also a question mark too, just because that's his first major surgery of his entire career. So they do meet again conveniently right after the deadline. I believe that first week of August, the Phillies will come to Dodger Stadium, probably looking a little bit different. And even Dave Roberts alluded to that, when he was in his office after Game 3, he kind of said, they're playing a better brand of baseball right now, but we expect to look pretty much very different, this time come August, which is correct. That's the correct response. Hopefully you're getting some guys back. Mookie Betts maybe not be ready, but they may have added, 1 or 2 big bats. They may have added, a frontline starter. Tyler Glasnow may be back. So that's when I'll really judge these two teams right now, because those last 2 games, if it wasn't for a couple defensive miscues and a couple, bullpen issues later in the game, they probably would have won at least 1 or maybe even 2 of those games, especially games 2 and games 3 of that series. So, but that's just baseball for you. After that, they go to Detroit. You're hoping that they can rebound, but unfortunately they're catching a Tigers team that just is playing really good baseball right now. Not only did they take a series from the Dodgers this past week, but they also, they took a series, and I believe it was a 4-game series. It took 3 of 4 from the Cleveland Guardians. So they were playing some hot baseball right now. They kind of are were playing with, gritty, mentality. They were scrappy, getting away with these wins, and they end up getting, the Dodgers ended up getting, the short end of the stick, with back-to-back walk-off wins. So what did you just see in this Tiger series? Did you just see a defeated team that's just waiting to get to the All-Star break just because it just didn't look like they had the pitching this series?
A little bit, yeah. Look, you could have argued they should have lost game 1 of the series, but obviously they rally back from a 3-run deficit going up against a really, really good pitcher on the mound that they were able to knock out of the game early, get to that Tigers bullpen, which is not great, and put up runs and make a comeback. Shohei Ohtani, obviously, with the clutch hit, and Teoscar Hernandez. And those guys, through this injury rut that you've been talking about, have been absolutely carrying the Dodgers like a backpack, especially, obviously, Shohei with his power, but Teoscar Hernandez with his just clutch, timely hitting time and time again throughout this stretch. So you rally and win that game in the 9th, and then you cannot blow a 5-run lead in the bottom of the 9th in that middle game of that series. That is absolutely unacceptable. I don't know. I mean, ship your cap, I guess, to the Tigers, but Evan Phillips has to be better. Ricky Velasco has to be like, you cannot blow that game with a 5-run lead in the bottom of the 9th. I'm sorry. That just can't happen. It's unacceptable. And obviously we know this team a little better this year, but they struggle in extra inning games, but not being able to put up a run with the ghost runner on second in the top of the 10th. Just, again, an unexcusable mistake. And then to blow a lead in the final game of the series, the rubber match, again, blow a save in the bottom of the 9th when you take a 3-2 lead into it. Just need to shut it down. And you have Alex Vesia in the pen ready to rock. That's a head-scratching one, too. And it just seemed like, they were just trying to limp over the finish line, at this point, the midpoint finish line of the season. But you understand the analogy there. I think that you can look at it as just, we're a team limping in here and a hungry tiger, pacing back and forth in a cage, like you said, playing good baseball. But to me, the Dodgers could have swept that series pretty easily, especially after taking game 1, especially after the way some of those guys performed, like Landon Knack in the second game of that series. And for most of the bullpen up until Yohan Ramirez in the 9th in game 3 of that series. But the offense can't give you 3 runs to start the game and then just go, MIA like somebody on the milk carton in the next 8 innings. If you're the Dodgers and you have the front running MVP in Shohei Ohtani, a former MVP in Freddie Freeman, Teoscar Hernandez, I think one of the top leaders in the National League in RBIs, especially in clutch hitting statistics this year. Will Smith, you got to be able to put up more runs those next 8 innings, even if you just add on 1 or 2 insurance runs to try to make it a tougher hill to climb for the Tigers. Now, granted, they overcame a 5-run lead in the game before, but still, any little bit helps. And so I was really looking at the offense, who, once they disappear like that for 8 innings, it just kind of seemed like they were just ready to get to the break, to get the heck out of there, especially after 2 10:30 game starts here on the West Coast, 1 a.m. there. That, they're going through the grind of multiple time zones on a road trip like that. Probably some jet lag. I know the 3 stars, even though the Dodgers had 6, but only 3 of them are actually heading to Texas. So those guys on a plane going straight from Detroit to Arlington to Dallas for the All-Star game, where everybody else is going to try to take off from there and get some rest and relaxation and try to reboot. But that, to me, this point, losing 8 of 11 and losing to the Tigers, not necessarily losing the series, but in the manner in which you lost the series, back-to-back blown saves, including a 5-run lead entering the bottom of the 9th in that second game. That is, to me right now, the lowest I've seen the Dodgers this year. And they've hit some low points on this roller coaster ride. The good news is, seemingly whenever they do, and we're sitting here scratching our heads, they make a move and run off like 8 of 10, which we know this team can do, especially if healthy. So that's what I'm hoping to see in the second half of the season, because the last thing I'll say, Cody, this Dodgers team in the Andrew Friedman era seemingly has been just, this is where the biggest difference is. July, August, those dog days of summer, they turn it on and they are better than everyone else in the league by far over those 2 months. and they create separation and they create space in the division most of the time. And then that allows them to rest guys and get healthy and get ready for the postseason, which obviously we know hasn't obviously been the best success when those scenarios have come up compared to where they have to fight and claw and scratch to get into the postseason and then come in, ready to go. But that this is the time where they usually turn it on. And so they're going to need to do that again in the second half.
Yeah, me and Juan Ramirez, who's the other co-host of this show, we always have a running joke where the Dodgers are ready to get back to Dodgers summer, where out of nowhere they just go on an 80-20 run during the heat of summer, the dog days of summer, unheard of for with other teams, where they usually start to struggle when the weather starts to get a little bit hotter, it gets humid. You're going from coast to coast, all these road trips. Dodgers, they just handle it differently. So far, it's kind of going back to what you mentioned. I don't think the Dodgers have really fired on all cylinders this season. It seems like when one area is doing well, another area of the team is not doing well. Or if one area is healthy, the other area is just going through, injuries, or they have to, guys are getting optioned down, inconsistencies. Right now, I would agree with you that this is the lowest point of the Dodgers season, which, I mean, if you're looking at a silver lining out of that, is that you can only go up from here. So, and they finally get probably conveniently at the All-Star break. You get a couple days off. You get a couple days to regroup. Obviously, the three All-Star representatives, they're getting sent, but those three guys are not the ones that I'm worried about in terms of performance. Ohtani, Smith, Freeman, they've kind of been doing their thing all season. I know Will Smith has kind of been up and down. Ohtani's had his thing with runners in scoring position, but I have full confidence in those guys. I know it's coming up. The July 30th MLB trade deadline is always MLB trade deadline is one of the best in all of sports, just because of how chaotic it can be. And the Dodgers, in recent history, are one of those teams that can actually just surprise a lot of people. Obviously, everyone knows they're going to be buyers this year. They've been buyers every year since 2013, or even a little bit before that, when they got new ownership, and then they've been trying to build this new, winning culture. This year, it's a little bit different. They spend over $1 billion in the offseason. Granted, it was one of $700 million of that was for one player. But they showed, their fans, they show the league that they are in it to contend this year. I think it would be pretty weird if they didn't, have that same mentality in the deadline this year. But if you look on social media, a lot of Dodger fans are not optimistic that this team is going to try to be aggressive this deadline. So I'm kind of interested to see what you think the Dodgers are going to address. Are there any particular needs that you think is at the top of their bucket list? Any players that you think that they could add? Kind of what are you thinking is the Dodgers' plan this deadline, or what would you do if you were in Andrew Friedman's shoes?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And this is my favorite part of the show. This is almost my favorite part of the year. As we get closer and closer to the deadline, I start texting my sources. Things get heated up. We start to hear all the rumors. Fans get excited. And it's this time of year that I really get into as a way to kind of reinvigorate during those dog days of summer, those summer doldrums we talked about. The problem with so I've talked extensively to Andrew Friedman. I do consider him a friend, not, like a close friend. Obviously, it's a business professional working relationship, but love speaking to him privately, one-on-one, see him all the time in the press box with his kids, and get a chance to pick his brain a little bit. He always tells me and explains it to me that there's, in a way, two trade deadlines. There's this trade deadline, obviously, here in the middle of the season, which everyone puts so much stress and importance on. But Andrew Friedman looks at the offseason winter as a trade deadline too. Ultimately, for him, he just sees it as, how can I improve the team, right? How can I fix holes that may be there? How can I make us better? How can I get us over the hill to win another World Series? And so he sees it as two opportunities. And really, you got to look at it from a financial economic standpoint, where, the simple economics of it are buy low, sell high, but more like, what is the value? What is the price of things? It's kind of like the real estate market, right? I had a house out in Calabasas, and, there's what Zillow says the house is worth. There's what it might be worth in a fluctuating housing market. And then there's what someone might come in and back up the Brinks truck and pay for it if they want to make you an offer. And that's how Andrew Friedman views it as well. And so typically, especially this time of year, and with the new changes MLB's made by the expanded postseason, adding an extra wild card team, changing the format a little bit, it's really, really change the calculus on the July 31st MLB trade deadline compared to the offseason. Look, the Texas Rangers won the World Series, but the Dodgers won the winter. The Dodgers for sure won the offseason this year. They landed the best player in all of baseball, two-time unanimous MVP in Shohei Ohtani. You go out and get a three-time Japanese Cy Young Award winner, MVP in the Japanese League, arguably the best starting pitcher on the market in Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who every contending team wanted. You not only get Ohtani, you get him as well. Then you go out and you sign a stud righty who can crush left-handed pitching in Teoscar Hernandez, who's been, in my opinion, the inner MVP of this Dodgers team. I know you can look at Mookie or Shohei or even Tyler Glasnow, but the clutch hitting, the energy he brings to the locker room, the celebrations he brings to his teammates, the way he's performed for this Dodgers team, to me, Teoscar Hernandez is the MVP right now at the midway point of this year on the Dodgers. And you go trade for a guy like Tyler Glasnow, a front-end starter you so desperately needed after your rotation was a mess and completely depleted going into the postseason last year. And so you on the offseason, you made those moves. I really think Andrew Friedman sees that as his kind of trade deadline, his way to improve the team. But with that said, there are some needs that the Dodgers clearly have right now as we head into the July 31st deadline. The problem that I see, there's a twofold problem here. One, Cody, is that with so many guys on the injured list, you don't really know what you have. This is what you and I just talked about, right? We don't really know if everyone's healthy and we're firing all cylinders, what we look like, what the holes will be then, what the kryptonite and weaknesses will be at that time when everyone's healthy and we're rolling. Are we completely unbeatable? Are we the juggernaut everyone thinks they are? Or do we still have flaws? Is Gavin Lux at second base still a place to improve? Is that somewhere where maybe we need to go look? Is Max Muncy going to come back and be a plus defender at third base? He kind of showed flashes of it at points of this season, a little bit improved, but still not great, right? And so is that an area to improve upon potentially in a trade? You know, there was an offer at the deadline last table. I believe it was Max Muncy, Bobby Miller, or a guy like Bobby Miller, could have been Emmett Sheehan or something. And then a guy like Chris Taylor, maybe, or a guy like Andy Pajes in the minors or something for Nolan Arenado. And I thought, you know, if the Dodgers could have pulled the trigger, they should have done it. Obviously, the news and the rumors leaked. And then all of a sudden, the Cardinals GM had to backtrack on that because people in St. Louis didn't want to lose their best player. And obviously, he hasn't played that well this year. He's struggled, and his defense has actually struggled, which has been the most surprising thing to me. But that would have fixed the third base situation with the Dodgers. So is that an area where they need to address? Look, Kike Hernandez, Chris Taylor, Kevin Biggio, Miguel Vargas, James Outman, like, yeah, you can say get rid of them and bring in other pieces, but those are bench guys anyways. Those are platoon guys. Those are depth guys. Chris Taylor seems to be figuring things out. Kike always hits around the Mendoza line and then turns it on in the postseason. He's proven that he's a big game player, kind of like Walker Buehler is. Miggy Vargas has shown flashes. James Outman, you would hope, can figure it out. Andy Pajes, in my opinion, during the first half, the first quarter of the season, was the biggest game changer for the Dodgers. That back end of the lineup was absolutely atrocious. And then you send Outman down, you bring Pajes up, and suddenly the team starts rolling again because they filled that back end of the lineup hole. They got some production finally from it. So, you know, he's going to have ebbs and flows in his rookie season, but that's a place where I think you're happy with him. And now he doesn't become a guy you want to move. He's a guy you want to keep. And maybe Outman's a guy now you think about moving. Anyways, these are all the questions that become a problem in the calculus for Andrew Friedman, because you need them all healthy to see what you got. And you brought it up, some of the questions like Clayton Kershaw coming off shoulder surgery. I know he's close, but once he starts throwing in real games, MLB action, where the adrenaline's rolling and all that, how's the shoulder going to recover in the 4 days between starts? How's he going to look? What's the velocity at? Is his slider and curveball going to be elite like it's always been for him? Those are things you need to know, and you don't know right now. Are you going to get Brusdar Graterol back to the old Brusdar Graterol with that, like I said, that bowling ball sinker that come at you at 100 miles per hour that just breaks bats? Are you going to get that guy? You're going to get the Graterol that was allowed one earned run over the last like 2 months in the second half of last season. If that the guy you're going to get, are you going to get Joe Kelly, in his elite form? You need to know these questions. You need to know if Yamamoto is going to come back and be the Yamamoto he was in the Nippon League. You need to know if Tyler Glasnow is good to go. You need to know if Walker Buehler can come back and give you something, Bobby Miller, those things. Because if they can't, suddenly the moves you need to make now in the next 2 weeks become a lot more important than if those guys can come back and give you what they've been able to do in their careers. As Dave Roberts likes to say, what they can do on the back of the baseball card. If they can put up those kind of numbers, then you don't need to make as many moves as I think this team thinks they need to make. So that's the first question that, unfortunately, is very difficult to answer when you can't see him play on the field in a major league game on the diamond. So those first kind of 10 games back after the All-Star break, depending on who can come back for the Dodgers, Kershaw might be one of them. Glasnow, obviously. I don't know when we're expecting Yamamoto, but he might be a guy there too. Those are going to be important games to see. Bobby Miller, obviously, as well, even down in AAA, if he can figure some things out. When does Walker Buehler come back? If we can see those guys, then quickly Andrew Friedman's going to be able to really pick up the phone and see what pieces he needs to add. Second part of that calculus and equation is, as I mentioned, with the new postseason expanded rosters, who's a seller right now? Because my math tells me, especially in the National League, there's only 3 teams you could argue that are sellers definitively: the Marlins, the Rockies, and the Nationals. Everyone else is within 3 games of the final wild card spot. I don't think any of those teams are selling. And so suddenly you have like 24 teams that are buyers at the deadline, all trying to pick at the carcasses of 3 teams or 6 teams that we know for sure are sellers, like vultures, picking up roadkill. So I know we're all looking at a lot of the big names out there, because this is just what Dodgers fans do. It's what Lakers fans do, right? We want the stars. We want the biggest names. So we want Luis Robert Jr. here. We want Bo Bichette. We want Vladdy Guerrero. We want Jazz Chisholm. We want Alex Bregman. We want Randy Arozarena. If we're looking at the pitchers, we want Garrett Crochet from the White Sox. We want Kikuchi. We want Max Scherzer or Verlander if they become available, or if Blake Snell wants to leave the Giants if they decide to be sellers. We want these guys, but the truth of the matter is we don't know if those guys are going to be all available. And in the case of the White Sox, which we think are going to be sellers, and the Blue Jays we think are going to be sellers, you're going to be competing against 20 other teams who are trying to get these guys too, which makes their value skyrocket, which means you might have to start selling huge chunks of the farm and maybe even some of your starting players, depending on what the asks are on the other end. Like in the case of the Blue Jays, I don't think they want to hit reset on everything. They may want to move some guys on expiring deals, but they want to probably want some major league talent that can come play at the big league level next year rather than rebuild completely, like maybe what the White Sox would be doing there. So that's the interesting thing. I know this is another long-winded answer and tirade, and we can break up some of the trade guys, but third base is a big question for me if you're the Dodgers. Max Muncy's been out since May 15th with that oblique injury. I don't think he's eligible to come off, and I think they're looking at like late August at best. Kayvon Biggio has not been the answer. Chris Taylor and Kike Hernandez have not been the answer at third base. I would like to see if and when Mookie Betts can come back, and unfortunately it's probably looking like around the same time. But if you could have Mookie at short, maybe move Miggy Rowe to third base. He's played that some in his career. Maybe that's the answer. I'm not sure. But third base or shortstop could potentially be a position of need for the Dodgers at the deadline. The big question is, are they going to go big with a guy like Bo Bichette, which then means Mookie's heading back to the outfield? Or are they going to try to do more of a stopgap guy, pick someone that, like a Paul DeYoung or a Patrick Wilson on the Cubs or Ahmed Rosario? Are they going to do like a Isaiah Kinner Falefa on the Blue Jays? Are they going to just do kind of like a stopgap move, a guy that once Mookie comes back or Muncy comes back can go to the bench? My gut tells me that's probably the move they make, and not a big name like Bo Bichette or Alex Bregman. But obviously the fans are going to want those big names. Next after that, again, this all depends on who's available and what you can do. But I think you need to get an outfielder. And again, it's going to depend, like, are they going to move on from the Mookie Betts at short experiment? And if you decide, you know what, just probably shouldn't have thrown him into the fire 3 days before opening day or before Korea, whatever it was, to try to learn a new position, arguably the hardest position in all of baseball to play, and do it and expect immediate results and not expect the ebbs and flows of figuring that position out and all the errors and mistakes he makes. I don't think personally, with his development as a shortstop, this wrist hand injury that's going to shelve him for at least 2 months, I think it kind of makes the answer a lot more clear that when he comes back late August and you have 6 weeks to get ready for the postseason, that's not enough to keep this experiment alive, in my opinion. I don't think you can have Mookie trying to still learn the position in October when the lights are the brightest and everything's going to be magnified, and one mistake can cost you a series. So it could be they're going to get another infielder. They could be getting a shortstop at the deadline, and that means Mookie's heading back to the outfield, which then means you don't need to get another outfielder. But if they do decide to go outfield help and keep Mookie at short, Randy Arozarena, I know the Rays are going to be sellers most likely. They're kind of still hanging around. They're 5.5 out of that second wild card, and we know the Rays are always in it. But they had conversations about Randy Arozarena in the offseason when they were looking to get Tyler Glasnow. Obviously, it ended up being Manuel Margot, but there were talks about a package with Arozarena filling that spot instead. He could be available. I think that's a name that could be really likely to come if the Dodgers decide to go that route, get a shortstop or a third baseman, keep Mookie in the infield, and get an outfielder. That's a guy. Taylor Ward on the Angels is another name that I think might be available that they might look at. I want to see what the Diamondbacks do. I don't think the Diamondbacks are going to sell. I mean, I think right now, after what they did to the Dodgers, and they're kind of getting healthy at the right time, I think they moved ahead of the Padres today as they head to the break. But, the Dodgers always like guys that have been in the system and know how the team plays and know what the roles are. So I say that because a guy like Jock would be perfect to kind of come in and mash righties. He's a guy they've had before. Justin Turner, I don't think is something, but if you look at filling in the third base because you don't think you might have Muncy, hey, is maybe he available for a reunion to kind of come back? He's a guy that obviously knows this team, knows the system. Tommy Pham is another outfield name that people have linked to him. Obviously, he came and signed with the Sox, but I'm sure he's probably going to get moved. And you saw what he did to help the Diamondbacks at the deadline last year. So that's another name that I could see coming back in some of these talks and rumors. And then finally, pitching. And to me, if you're healthy, I don't think you need starting pitching, but you may need a mid-rotation guy to get you through the dog days of summer here while you're waiting for everyone to get healthy. To me, a guy like Jack Flaherty on the Tigers could be great for that. That's a name that people have talked about. Nathan Eovaldi, a former Dodger and a guy that ruined him in that 2018 World Series. If the Rangers decide to sell and blow it up and move like Scherzer and Eovaldi, that could be another name there. It just depends on what guys are going to be available. But to me, I wouldn't look at a huge name per se. I know Garrett Crochet is the one that everybody wants, and I see it and I get it. I just don't necessarily see the Dodgers with Glasnow and Yamamoto and Kershaw and Buehler and those guys all expected back going for the big fish there when they could kind of bring in a mid-level guy that can get them some wins here through the doldrums. And then finally, I would like to see him lock in a relief pitcher because I'm just not sold on Evan Phillips right now. He's had his struggles a little bit last year. We saw it in blowing that save in Detroit in the second game. My number one target is Mason Miller on the A's. Like, that guy is probably front of the line as a relief pitcher, throws from the right-hand side. Go grab him. There's some other guys that could be available. Shoot, if the Astros decide to become sellers, go get Ryan Presley. That's a great guy that I know the Dodgers were interested in a few years ago when he went from Minnesota to Houston. So those are the kind of names I see. It just kind of depends on who's available, but I could see the Dodgers adding a reliever. Yimi Garcia could be another guy that could be available that obviously is familiar with the team. And like I said, they like bringing guys that are familiar with the team. I know they were interested in Jake Diekman years ago when he was with the Royals. If the Mets sell, that's a guy, maybe Ottavino. So relief pitcher for sure. I'd like to see that. I think they make that move. Maybe a starting pitcher, but I'm thinking more of a mid-level guy. And then it just depends on if you're going to go shortstop, third baseman, or if you're going to go outfielder.
And I'll even come back to you with the relief pitching because I think one name that's been linked, and we talked about it, previous episode, was, Kenley Jansen. Kenley Jansen's been rumored since like midwinter, and we had Robbie Hyde, who's a huge Red Sox fan, huge baseball YouTuber, and he was kind of talking about, especially the comments that Jansen made on Foul Territory the other day, where he said he wanted to retire in Dodger Blue.
Mhm.
Would you be okay if the Dodgers, you mentioned they like guys that know the system, know their role. Do you think the Dodgers and Jansen just make sense as a reunion because of the needs you just mentioned?
Yeah, 100%. I forgot to mention him, but he was at the top of my list that I was reading off of you too. Yes, but here's my concern with that. We know what Kenley Jansen is. We've seen him here. Everyone would love to see that reunion. God, everyone's going to go crazy once California Love plays, you know, all over the PA system at Dodger Stadium at Chavez Ravine, and he comes out of the left field bullpen gates. That's going to be amazing if we could see that, him coming back in Dodger Blue. And can you imagine the hype that's going to be around that opening series at Dodger Stadium when they play the Red Sox and Kenley Jansen's back in town with trade rumors swirling? Again, though, the hard thing is the Red Sox right now are in the wild card picture. So I know everybody wants to see it. I know everyone's talking about it, but why on earth would the Red Sox be selling? They should be adding right now. You know what I mean? They should be going out weird and adding a Justin Turner, who was just there last year, is very familiar, can move, down the Canadian border a little bit and come play for them. So that's kind of why I didn't mention him, but also I simply forgot. But like the Red Sox are in the hunt right now, and that's because they've had a great June and early July to get back in the playoff picture while the Yankees have kind of fallen off. So to me, they're not sellers right now. But yes, I would like to see it. But then the question becomes is, if this is the postseason, if it's the Phillies, Dodgers, NLCS, Game 7, 3-3, 8th or ninth inning, you really trust Kenley Jansen coming in the bottom of the ninth to try to seal this deal? Or if you're up 4-3, are you going to try to seal it deal? I don't know. I don't see it personally. He's been great. He was great in Atlanta. He's been great in Boston, but we've seen what he is at the Dodgers. And if that cutter's not cutting, people smash that pitch out of the ballpark now at this point in his career. And Evan Phillips, same thing. If that slider's not sliding, he's hittable. Blake Trinan's had a little bump lately, but he was great. I might be more comfortable with Blake Trinan or Daniel Hudson in that closer role, or Alex Vesia, the way he's been throwing the ball, or Brusdar Graterol, if he can come back and be the Brusdar of old, then I necessarily would be with Kenley Jansen. So if you're bringing Kenley Jansen, is he okay with being a high leverage relief pitcher, or does he want to be the closer? And if he wants to be the closer, I don't know how comfortable I am like that in October. I think that first game that they came back and won and beat the Tigers, they threw Evan Phillips in the 6th or 7th, I believe.
Yeah.
And then went with Daniel Hudson to close that game out in the 9th and get the save. I like that. I like going with the matchups. I don't necessarily think it's roles. And I just wonder if where Kenley Jansen is and his ego and his legacy, if he thinks he's going to be the closer no matter what, and if that could then hurt you come October.
Yeah, and I think going back to the trade talk, you bring up a lot of good points. Some points that I've actually always thought, especially when they went to the expanded postseason format, and that's just, is anybody truly out of it? There's really only, like you said, there's really only 3 teams in the National League that are actually selling. In the American League, it's very similar as well. The National League wild card, like you mentioned, a lot of those teams are within 3.5 games of each other. They are technically, mathematically, still in the race. Why do they want to sell? And then it's a seller's market. Now if you're a buyer and you're looking around the market like a team like the Dodgers, they can pretty much, inflation, it's not just affecting the economy, it's affecting all of baseball right now as well. So if the Dodgers really want a guy, if they really want someone to be in the rotation, or if they want a bat to supplement in the outfield or the infield, they may have to overpay. And then add in the fact that they're competing with not just 1, 2, 3, or 4, maybe 5 or 6 other teams that are also just trying to make that move as well. So that's why I feel like this year and previous year's deadline was a lot more difficult, just because of the new playoff format, because with the more teams in the pool, less teams are more likely to sell all their assets, especially, teams that are going through. I feel like you don't really see major rebuilds anymore. Obviously, like the Marlins are kind of going through their thing right now. The White Sox are doing their major rebuild, but most other franchises are kind of hovering around that 500 mark. And right now, that 500 mark, a couple more wins go your way, you may be a third wild card team. So That's the downside of this new playoff format. It's just the card that baseball was dealt right now. It's more money. It's more games for October. But we'll end it on a good note with everything we've talked about with the Dodgers struggling the past like almost 2 months. A lot of the trade talk. But when the time this episode drops, the Home Run Derby will be tonight. Teoscar Hernandez is representing the Dodgers. And then the day after that, we got the 2024 MLB All-Star Game, and the Dodgers are going to be represented there. Is there anything you're looking forward to this All-Star Week, or are you kind of just getting ready to talk trades and just resting your eyes from watching some Dodger baseball right now? Or are you going to be tuned into the Teoscar Hernandez Home Run Derby?
Yeah, 2 quick questions on that. On that for you, Cody. First and foremost, for fans who don't know and just think, don't really know how the trade deadline works, and what you were talking about as far as sellers and teams that are selling and teams that are buyers, obviously, the problem is, and we look at last year as a great example, right? You might pick up the phone and you call the Mets and say, okay, Scherzer going to be available. Is Verlander going to be available? And the Mets might be like, we don't know right now on July 13th if we're going to sell. Right? We're kind of seeing how we start the second half. If we go on a 9-1, 10-game stretch, we might keep it together and see if we can make a push. This is what teams are doing. So if you're the Dodgers, do you sit and wait and sit on your hands and sit on your thumbs for those guys? Or do you pivot to a team that you know is going to sell? And it's the same teams this year, the White Sox, the A's, the Rockies, you know what I mean? And say, let's get a deal done now for a guy rather than wait. And everyone's waiting for if a team decides to buy or sell. I was one who broke the Bryce Harper trade rumors years ago before he ended up eventually not getting traded at the deadline. But Mike Rizzo was telling teams like, we don't know if we're going to sell or not, right? Tell me what you would give me for Bryce Harper right now, but I haven't decided if I'm going to do this or not. And that went on for weeks. So Bryce Harper is such a big fish. You have to get him if you can get him, right? Same as Juan Soto a couple years ago here in 2022. But if you don't know if the team's going to move and the opposing GM is kind of waiting to see what his team does, you're going to lose out on a lot of good guys that are for sure sellers that could really boost your team up. And this is the struggle that the Dodgers are going to have to go through and deal with. And so for fans know, this is the conversations they have. So the conundrum, if you're Andrew Friedman of sorts, is do you go make a deal with the White Sox right now for a Garrett Crochet? If they even want to move him, this was the thing. They probably wanted Dylan Cease last year, but the White Sox weren't sure. That was a wait and see thing, but you can have Lance Lynn, you can have Lucas Giolito. And so those were the guys. Do you make the move for the sure thing that can improve your team, but might not be an all-star caliber player that can really move the needle? And these are going to be the conversations they have as we get into it. And I'm really excited to see how those things heat up. And some of those teams we mentioned, the Blue Jays, the Red Sox, the Astros, the Angels, how they open up the second half of the season in those first 10, 12 games. Because if you're a Dodgers fan, you're rooting for some of those teams, the Rangers even, I might add, you're rooting for some of those teams to start cold and start losing and go on a dry spell, because suddenly guys will become available that may have not been available as we're recording this podcast today. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking for myself to be able to reset and reload after just what seems like a long summer, a long playoffs and off season with the Lakers and some of these other teams. So I'm looking to just kind of reset and reload myself. The All-Star break is always a time that I go take a short trip and take a little break vacation myself. And then finally, look, I am not a huge fan of the MLB All-Star game. I hated when they made it decide who have home field advantage in the World Series. It's an exhibition game. It's a showcase. I don't like watching it as much. To me, I really, really enjoy the Home Run Derby. That to me is, I don't know, more fun, more entertaining, I guess, than the actual All-Star game itself. So yeah, I want to see Teoscar Hernandez and see how he performs, but I'm realistic to know that no Dodgers ever won the Derby outside of Jock Peterson a couple years ago when he kind of went to the finals and went toe to toe. I don't necessarily have a lot of high hopes for Teoscar Hernandez. I believe he's got the second worst odds to win it. But I want to see if Pete Alonso, the polar bear, and maybe his last time in a Mets uniform, because he could get moved, I want to see if he wins it. I want to see if Adolis Garcia in his home stadium at Globe Life Field there in Arlington close to where he grew up. I want to see if he can win it. Ozuna, who mashes, maybe he can win it. Gunnar Henderson, Bobby Witt Jr., those two guys, I want to see them perform in this derby. So just between you and I, Cody, I'm more looking forward to the home run derby and being back in Globe Life Field, where I have some great memories of that 2020 World Series in the bubble. That's what I'm looking forward to this All-Star break.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think the home run derby is just a lot more enjoyable. Who doesn't like seeing the long ball and then you're seeing hundreds of home runs hit? The All-Star game, I am excited. I'm a big LSU guy. That Paul Skeens got the nod. You don't really see that too often.
Yeah, that's cool.
But pretty much after that second inning, I usually just kind of tune out a little bit. I can't tell you the last time I watched an All-Star game, a full 9 innings of play. I think when it was hosted in LA was like the closest I came to watching, the full game. But it's also, I feel like, a time for people, like even like with a fan blog or fan podcast, it's kind of like a mental break for me to like not really keep my eyes on the TV watching baseball, not checking my my Twitter feed to see if there's anything happening right there. So I kind of take that break as well. But other than that, I'm hoping that the Dodgers can take advantage of this break, take advantage, of everything that they went through this past couple days, past couple weeks, past 2 months, and then kind of try to reset it and then come back strong for this Red Sox series, because they have their work cut out for them. There are holes on this roster. There are injuries on this roster. The Dodgers, obviously, they have the biggest expectations put on their backs compared to any other franchise in the sport right now. But like you said, the trade deadline is always tricky. But any closing thoughts, as the Dodgers get to the second half, and like what their expectations are, or just anything else that you want to touch on?
Yeah, my closing thoughts. Thanks again for having me, Roger. I'll see you out at the Ravine. But my closing thoughts is going to be Clayton Kershaw, if you're listening, get healthy, get rested, get that shoulder ready to go. We're going to need you. We're going to rely on you. Maybe not to be the 2014 Clayton Kershaw MVP form, but the guy that you were last year prior to your injury, where you really carried this team, especially in the second half of the season and down the stretch, with that devastating slider and curveball. Come back healthy. You're the GOAT as far as Dodger pitchers are concerned. We need you. Walker Buehler, if you're in Florida listening to this, man, fix the mechanics, find the groove, find a good match of rosin and suntan lotion, whatever you need to get the grip that you used to have on the ball, and come back to be the big game Walker Buehler that we know and love, that loves and lives for those big moments. Mookie Betts, rest that hand, go on vacation, hit the beach, whatever you need to do, get some cool like electric shock therapy or something on the hand so that thing heals faster than normal, because we need you in the second half. Max Muncy, man, I don't know what you need to do with the oblique, work on the core, get a foam roller, whatever it is, but we need you back 100% healthy. Yamamoto, Glasnow, guys, we need to see this team locked and loaded, 100% healthy. So rest up, rest the mind, rest the body, and come back and really make a push here in the second half. Extend that lead you have in the NL West, in my opinion. Take a shot at the Phillies for best record in the National League. Figure out the calculus that you need between those 5 days off between the wild card series and the start of the NLDS, and go win a ring in a not COVID shortened season. That's my final thoughts.
Awesome, man. Michael, thanks for coming on. It's always good to talk shop, with Dodgers baseball, especially around this time of the year. It's my favorite time around this baseball season, whether it's the winter offseason rumors or right now with all the trade deadline stuff. So if anyone that is watching this or listening to this, that they don't follow you right now on social media, on X, wherever they can find you, they ought to, just because you do, break some news. You do got those, you got your sources, you got your inside scoop on all things Dodgers. So, but yeah, I can't thank you again for coming on here just to talk, for the first time on the Bleed Lows podcast, to talk about this Dodgers team, which I hope it could have been on higher notes, on higher hopes, but now we're moving forward to the second half, where I think the Dodgers are going to be fine, but obviously they're going to be making those big moves. But that'll be it for this episode of the Bleed Lows podcast. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and then be on the lookout for a couple episodes this upcoming week. We're going to try to preview the Red Sox series. And then if you have free time, go ahead and check out our latest live when we had Robbie Hyde from the Robbie Hyde Show come onto our program, talk about all trade deadline talk, which that's going to be the theme these next couple weeks until July 30th. But Michael, like I said, thanks again. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, guys, and go Dodgers. I'll see you all in the second half. I'm looking forward to it.
This episode has been brought to you by BetOnline. The game starts here.